But it looks like we're ready to go. And now we are on Facebook and Zoom. Just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this. It will be up on YouTube if you want to look back on it. And I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank Laurie and Lisa from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. We will have 2 question and answer periods, 2 or 3. And at the end, we will send out a brief survey. And I'll hand it over to Laurie to start the demonstration.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. If you were able to join us last time, welcome back. I want to thank Jennifer and Candace for arranging today's event. And I also want to thank Lisa Fishman for joining us today. She's going to be helping answer your questions. Lisa is a nutrition education professional in Fort Kent at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. One thing I just want to make sure is that I'm talking loud enough because my laptop is actually quite a ways away from me. And I have this feeling once I get going, I'm going to forget, look away from it, and all of that. So if you can't hear me, please just put it in the chat and someone can give me a reminder that I need to speak up. So one of the things that I did want to talk about before we get started is the additional resources that we have for food preservation. We're doing a weekly webinar series. It's Tuesdays at 2. And for more information or details or to register, go to the UMaine Cooperative Extension webpage for food preservation. And this coming week's topic is going to be freezing Maine seafood. And we're going to have a special guest. The presenter will be Chef Rob Dumas. So that'll be a fun one. And also we have a new program. It's called the Preserving Coach Program. It provides advice by phone or email for Maine residents. And possibly later in the season, it might even be able to be in person. But you'll be paired with a master food preserver, and they're going to help assist you in your food preservation projects. And to get signed up for that or to get more information, you can contact Kate McCarty, and her email is kate.mccarty@maine.edu, and that should be in your resources as well. And another thing, especially this time of year, pressure gauge testing for your pressure canners. You know, this is free to Maine residents. And if you're not in Maine, you can contact your local extension office where you are. But in Maine, contact your county extension office, or you can go to the Cooperative Extension website, webpage for contact information for each county. And also, something that kind of gets overlooked, especially lately, is the webpage that provides you with resources like recipes, videos, or publications. There's just so much information in there, and it'll really, really help you get started if you're new to preserving. And that link as well, along with some of the bulletins, are in the resources. So today's topics, we're going to talk about tested and current safe practices for preserving food at home. And I say preserving food at home because sometimes when we're at the grocery store, we'll see things that are preserved commercially, which is a different process that we just don't have the tools for to do it at home. So that's why I'm specific in preserving food at home. We're going to go over some handy tools for preserving and drying foods safely. We're going to talk about vegetables, herbs, and fruits. And we're going to have a demonstration on blanching produce and for freezing or for drying. An overview of water bath canners and an overview of pressure canners. So let's talk about safety. I know, safety, safety, safety. What we follow is USDA guidelines for home food preservation. We only ever want to use tested recipes from a reputable source like USDA or National Center for Home Food Preservation, of course, Cooperative Extension. Those tested recipes are going to give you processing times, the amount of time you need to have your jars in the canner, as well as what method. Do I need to use a pressure canner versus a water bath canner? And how long do I blanch my foods for? Things like that. So methods such as kettle canning, oven canning, canning low acid foods in a water bath canner, and methods such as that, they're just not safe. It's not worth it. So you want to use safe methods in your preservation projects. They just, for instance, if you use a water bath canner for your low acid foods, they just don't reach the required temperatures that you need to kill any mold or yeast or botulinum toxins. So, last safety tip, we always want to start with clean equipment, have inspected it beforehand, clean work surface, clean hands. I did wash my hands before we got started. And that is key. That is going to help you with successful canning projects. All right, so let's talk about some handy tools. And when I say handy tools, don't feel like you have to go out and buy one of the kits that you'll see advertised or anything like that. You might already have a lot of these tools in your kitchen. And one of the things that I wanted to start off with was a water bath canner. A lot of folks are used to seeing this in the stores, and you don't have to go out and purchase one of these. Any large pot like this one, as long as it has a cover and a rack in the bottom so that the jars aren't sitting on the bottom of the pot, can be used as a water bath canner. It does have to have enough room for you to have water over your jars and then room for the boiling water to expand. But take a look around your kitchen, see what you have, and maybe you have the setup for one already. So let's see here. Not enough room today. All right, so next I want to talk about jars. Don't use recycled spaghetti or gravy jars for canning. They're just not designed for reuse. Use canning jars. They're designed for reuse. They're made of tempered glass, and they're designed so that heating and reheating after many uses is not going to damage the jar. You won't have the jars break as much as if you were trying to use a jar that wasn't appropriate for canning. We always want to inspect our jars for nicks and cracks before we use them. Sometimes they're a little hard to see, but we want to take a good look. We're going to be washing them before we use them anyway, and that's a perfect time to inspect them. Of course, there's many, many sizes to choose from. You have your quart jar. These happen to be wide mouth, as they call it, and they also have regular mouth. Just keep in mind when you go to buy more lids, read the box and make sure you get the lids you need for your jar. Also, if you're in the position to be purchasing jars this year, think about what you're going to use them for, as far as how much are you going to consume. So for instance, when I do spaghetti sauce, I usually use a quart jar. But if I'm doing something like my salsa, I'll use a pint jar, because that's what I've figured out, is the best size for the consumption for my family. So make sure it matches your needs, the size. Oh, and I do prefer the wide mouth, just because I find it a little bit easier when I'm putting the food into the jars, but that's a personal preference. You might find something else entirely. So I do want to talk about the lids a little bit more. They need to be 2-part lids. You need the screw band and the dome lid. The screw band can be used many times as long as it's rust-free and not dented. Now the dome lid, that's for one-time use only. So those are not reusable. And if you think about it, you're going to be labeling your jars probably here anyway, so it might be getting a little confusing. So that's a good reminder that you can't reuse the lid. So if you happen to see one of the canning kits in your store, it's probably going to come with this bubble freer, and it does have a magnet on the other end, which is just fun to pick up your lids with. It's not really necessary, but what you do is you take your bubble freer, and it's plastic, because we never want to use metal. We never want to use anything like a knife or anything like that, because we could crack our jars without realizing it. So we want to use plastic. If you don't have the bubble freer, a spatula, a small spatula would work great, something like that. Okay. Now, let's see, let's talk about our headspace measuring tool. I bet you've all seen these. So headspace is the unfilled space above the food in the jar and below the lid. And your recipe is going to tell you what headspace you need for whatever product you're canning. And it's a little hard to see, but the increments are right there, like 1 inch, and then it goes down to 3/4, 1/2, and 1/4. And the way that you use it, like if it were 1 inch, you would take and put the 1 inch mark on the edge of your jar, and you need to have the fluid or the food product not to exceed that. Okay. So just some general guidelines for that. For instance, for jams and jellies, it's usually 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch for fruits or tomatoes that are processed in a boiling water. So that's what 1/2 inch would look like. And remember, headspace is not just for canning jars, that's for freezing as well. Headspace allows the food room to expand, and it allows for a vacuum seal to be formed if you're using a canning jar. But if it's a bag, if you're putting food in freezer bags, food grade freezer bags, then you still need to allow for headspace. Another handy tool for this, or a handy use for this, is that you can use it as a bubble freer. So it's plastic, so you can just slide it around. If there were food in here, you would see bubbles releasing from the liquid. I don't like to have a whole lot of tools around when I'm trying to work, because I just think it just makes a clutter, and it's harder for me to work in my space. So for instance, I don't usually have this out. I usually just use my headspace measurer as my bubble freer as well. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, we have our funnel. Obviously, we know what the funnel does. It just makes it a little easier when we're loading our food into the jars. Ladle. Have a ladle handy. You're always going to be using that. I also like to keep a spoon handy, because say my headspace measurer tells me I've got too much liquid in there, I can just take this little spoon and take some out. So those are the things I like to have on hand. Oh, I always try to have a marker ready. just in case I need to be labeling something. That you can keep off to the side. Our jar lifter. When you're taking your jars in and out of your canners, makes it super easy to lift them and place them in. That is one tool that you may not have on hand, but super handy. But again, you don't need a special ladle. Yes, there are some fancy ones out there that have a square back that sit in your pot really nicely and whatnot, but not necessary. So let's talk about drying some foods. Approved and safe methods for drying in our area, in the state of Maine particularly, is to use an electric dehydrator, air drying, and a microwave. Now, solar drying, it's just not approved for our area because we have such high humidity and low nighttime temperatures. So that's not an option for us here in Maine, I'm afraid. But that's okay. We have other methods. So I'm going to bring a dehydrator out. And first and foremost, keep your owner's manual. Always keep your owner's manual for this. For instance, it has a great reference for what temperatures and lengths to dry your vegetables, your fruits, things like that. It has recipes, super handy to have. So keep a hold of that. Now, this one in particular happens to have on the lid a temperature guide. I don't think you're going to be able to see that. But that's handy. This one does expand to quite a few trays, and I believe that you can buy more trays. As a demonstration, I filled one of the trays with some herbs. I have some sage on there and some thyme. I do like to dry the sage with the stems on, but you can remove the stems if you prefer. So what's going to happen is I am going to put these trays together like this, and then they'll stack onto the dehydrator. It also comes with additional parts for like fruit roll-ups and things like that. It has a mesh tray. But what I really wanted to talk about, and I'm hoping you all are going to be able to see. I'm just going to leave this on for 1 second. So what I wanted to show you was that you can set this for different temperatures and times. And that's very, very helpful. I do have one at home that is just one temperature, and you plug it in and it goes. And I do find that it requires a lot more attention on my part, and I really have to babysit it. So I do really like that we have the different temperatures and the timer on this one. And in addition to the dehydrator, of course, we do have the microwave that we can dry things in. And I was kind of skeptical about drying in a microwave. I was like, how's that going to work? Well, turns out works great, especially in retaining the color. And I'm just going to zip over here to the microwave and show you what I did earlier. So these are just regular paper towels. Got 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. I'm going to hold this up to the camera a little bit closer. So that's some lemon balm leaves. I did make sure that I removed the stem because I didn't want to overdo the leaves while the stem was still working, so to speak. And I can tell when they're done, and I'm gonna make a mess here because it crumbles. So that's how I know that they're done. Now I'm only working in 30-second increments, and at the back end, when you're getting close to being dry, I even took it down to like 10-second increments because I didn't want to burn them, because that is a concern that you'll overdo them for sure. Now that's for drying herbs in the microwave, and we have several other ways that we can dry herbs. We can do air drying, as I mentioned. And so I have some beautiful herbs here. We have some dill and some parsley, some more thyme, some more sage, some dill weed, all very, very nice herbs. So we want to preserve them. So I've already washed them and prepared them. And so first, let's talk about air drying the herbs. If it's a tender herb, you can place the herbs in small bundles and place it in a paper bag. Super easy. Seems so strange to keep going out of view from you all. It also seems strange like to not hear you. So let's talk about the dill, okay? This is just a paper bag, just a lunch bag. And I've taken a paper punch and I've made holes on the sides. And I have a pretty small bundle of dill here. Even if it's air drying, where you're gonna hang this, you don't want big bunches because you don't want to encourage mold to grow before it gets to dry. So there's my dill. I'm gonna take a small rubber band, just wrap it around pretty tightly. I think I told you guys that I've already washed these, right? Wash them first and dry. I put mine in a salad spinner just to get the excess water off. I've already labeled my bag, dill and the date. I'm going to put the dill in, bunch the bag up at the top, and I have some string handy. I'm just going to tie it with the string. Sometimes, if I can't find string really handy, I'll rig something up with another rubber band. But then what you want to do is hang this in a warm, dry place until it dries. Now, the reason you would want to use, well, there's several reasons why you'd want to use the paper bag method. If you're drying something with seeds, the paper bag is going to dry the seeds. And if you're drying something that's tender, such as, let's see, such as our parsley here, we want to make sure that we catch those in the bottom of the bag and they don't end up on the floor. Another thing is, if your house, if you have, a lot of dust or cobwebs, things like that, that's a good way to protect the herbs while they're drying. I'm going to set that right there so you guys can see that as a reference. So yeah, same method with the parsley, except you don't drop some like I just did. And same method, take your string and tie it on. So I'm going to set this aside. So yeah, the other thing, if you want, is if you want to just tie your herbs in a bundle and then attach the string, and you have, you know, a good place, you know, that's warm and dry, you can just do it this way and hang it. But very, very easy. There you go. Let's see. So we talked about, I want to make sure I hit all the high points there. So we're drying vegetables until they're dry, brittle, and crisp. We're drying, if we were drying fruits in the dehydrator, we would want to dry them until they're flexible, but they don't stick to themselves if you bend them in half. And let's see. If you're really interested in drying, we happen to have a webinar coming up on the Tuesday webinar on September 29th, and that's going to focus on dehydrating vegetables and fruits. And I believe I have covered everything about drying, but if you have any questions about that, you can let me know. And speaking of questions, I think we are going to go into question and answer time with Lisa Fishman, and I'll be changing out my pots and pans and my tools. And Candace, do you mind muting me just because I'm going to be making lots of noise?
Me.
So I'm seeing in the chat box that there's a question about whether or not using an older model of a pressure canner is a good idea, or if someone should replace an old pressure canner with a newer digital one that's a little bit more modern. So the old pressure canners are still great to use. You do want to make sure they're in good repair. You want to make sure that if you have a dial gauge on your canner that you have had that tested by the Cooperative Extension. And again, that's a free service like Laurie talked about. You want to make sure that it's just got all the good working parts. Inside the lid, there's going to be a rubber gasket. You want to make sure that rubber gasket is still, and Laurie's going to cover the parts of a canner very shortly, but you just want to make sure that that rubber gasket is supple and it's soft and it's flexible. You don't want that to be dry or brittle or break off little chunks in your hands. That's a sign that that gasket needs to be replaced. Again, if you have purchased an older type of canner at a yard sale, or you've had one handed down to you, if you're a little unsure, go ahead and bring that canner into your local Cooperative Extension office. They'll be happy to go over the canner to make sure it's in good working condition. You don't want to get into a canning project just to find that your canner is missing a piece and you didn't realize that, and now you have 8 jars of applesauce ready to get canned, and you can't use your, or not applesauce, but carrots, and you can't use your canner because you didn't realize you were missing a piece. That's kind of heartbreaking. Another question that has come up in the chat box here is, how long will dried fruit last if it's kept in a Ziploc bag? Dried fruit is one of those things that as long as you don't introduce moisture to it, it has a shelf life of forever. So one of the things you want to be careful of when you do store your dehydrated food is you store your batches in small containers rather than one large container holding everything. The reason for that is every single piece of fruit or vegetable or whatever you've dehydrated has a little bit of a different size to it. Unless you are perfect at cutting every piece of food into the exact same size and shape, everything is going to be a little bit different. And so some pieces of food that you take out of your dehydrator will be a little more done and some will be a little less done. You're going to have to monitor that. If you happen to store a piece of food that's a little underdone, that has a little excess moisture in it, that could start to grow mold. And once mold grows into a jar of stored food, the entire batch will be lost. That mold will spread quickly. If, however, you store your foods in smaller jars, whether that's plastic bags, little containers, tins, whatever you're storing in, store in smaller sizes so that if one of those containers does grow a little bit of mold, you haven't lost your entire batch. Again, and you can keep a food that has not been exposed to any moisture for a long time. When you do open up your containers of dried food, try to make the time that the container is open as short as possible. If you find yourself 2 hours after opening up your dried blueberries, you find that your container is still sitting on the counter with the lid off, you've probably allowed a lot of moisture to get into that jar. So quickly open your jar, get the things out that you want to get out, and then get that cover back on and back into storage so as little moisture as possible can get into that jar. The next question on here that I can see is roughly how long does it take to air dry herbs if they're hung in a warm place? It's a great question. And that again is going to depend on how leafy that herb was and how much you've put in your bunch. If you have a bigger bunch and there's a lot of tightly packed in herbs there, it's going to take longer for air to circulate through those leaves and try to get every particle dry. So again, it's really important to go with small batches. And I noticed in one of the batches that Laurie put together, she kind of staggered. She had a long bouquet of the herbs, but she had some here at the top, some here in the middle, and some down longer with different lengths of stem. That's going to allow air to circulate around those herbs more quickly. And so depending on how much you have and how thick or tough those leaves are, you could dry anywhere from 2 to 3 days to maybe a week. So again, it's going to be very dependent on how much you're drying and how thick those leaves are. Something like a sage leaf is fairly thick, fairly long, as opposed to a thyme leaf. If you're a bunch of thyme, those are very tiny leaves, they're very small. So air is going to be able to circulate more quickly and dry those leaves out. Hope that answered your question. Another question that I see coming up is, how are the new electric pressure canners to use, and will those be covered in this part? And I think Laurie is going to talk about the electric pressure canners, and so I'm not going to jump into that question yet. If that question if she doesn't bring that up or cover your question, come on back to us and repose that question and we'll pick it up at the end, but I want to give her a chance to address that first. The next question is, would it be overkill to put dehydrated foods into a Ziploc bag and then a vacuum sealed bag? Can foods of different moistures be used on multiple racks of a dehydrator at the same time? If so, how would you layer? Oh, good questions. Unless you want to babysit that dehydrator and be checking every 15 minutes up to an hour around the clock, you probably want to stick with one food type at a time. It's going to be just a whole lot more maintenance for you to be able to monitor different foods with different thicknesses that require different drying times. You can do it, but again, it's going to be a constant monitoring process. And you might have to be shifting your trays around depending on where the heat source and where the fan source is coming in the dehydrator. Some dehydrators will have their heat source and the airflow coming up through the center, which comes up through the trays and around. And so stuff that's toward the center of a tray might dry quicker because that's just where the vent is coming up through. Some different dehydrators have the heat source coming in from the back. Those are like the trays that you would slide in almost like an oven style. And again, depending on where the heat's coming from, those foods might dry faster. If you're trying to keep everything on the same schedule, you might have to be doing a whole lot more babysitting, moving those foods around and getting them to all dry without over drying and turning into, well, nobody likes to have beef jerky that breaks when you drop it on the counter. That's just a little too crunchy. And nobody likes to have their dried fruits absolutely turn into a dog bone, like a leather chew your dog would like. So again, you need to monitor those. And you really don't need to go through the extra step of dehydrating foods and then putting them into a vacuum sealed bag. Any container will work, any jar will work. Again, the key is to store in smaller jars so that every time you open the jar, you're not exposing the entire batch of your dried goods to the moisture content of the air, but just a small amount at a time. I don't see any more questions now, so I'll go back on mute until the next question session comes up.
Okay, and I don't see any questions on Facebook, but if you are joining us on Facebook Live and you want to ask a question, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can give those to Laurie and Lisa. I think Laurie's unmuted now, so we will get back to the demonstration.
Okay. So I actually cut the electric canner from my presentation today due to time limitations. And that's super funny because it's like my favorite canner. So when we go back to the questions, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind answering that question, and I'll zip back to my office and bring one out so folks can take a look at it. But yeah, I don't know why I cut it, just time-wise, and like I said, I just love it, especially in my kitchen, because it really helps with the amount of space that I need to do my canning. So now we're going to talk about blanching. Of course, we're going to do boiling water blanching today, but there's also steam blanching that's an option as well. So blanching is going to stop those enzymes. And so that's why we want to blanch. We want to use 1 gallon of water per pound of produce. When it comes to timing, we want to start timing when our water comes back to a boil after we place it in the pot. Now, blanching times are crucial. Underblanching stimulates that enzyme activity that I was mentioning, and it's as bad as no blanching. Now, overblanching can cause loss of flavor, the color, the vitamins, and minerals. And one key you're going to find is cooling your vegetables quickly. And if you need a reference for blanching times, the National Center for Home Food Preservation has a great list, and also the Cooperative Extension has a list that's very handy. So what we can do here is we can switch back to me if you want, Candace. Take the slide down. There we go. Okay. So I have here, my 1 gallon of water. It's on the boil. That's one of the reasons why it's so hot in here. I'm standing right by a boiling pot of water. I have an ice bath because, like I said, it's crucial to cool that down as quickly as possible. I think you all can kind of see it. Now, normally, I wouldn't be doing this here. I would be doing this back over at the sink, but I wanted you all to be able to see, and so that's why I have this set up here for you to all see the demonstration. Now, I do have a blanching pot. Super fancy, but I'm sure many of you have just used a metal colander and put it in a pot before, and that's acceptable. You do not have to have this three-piece blanching pot. The cover is right there. I don't know if you can see the holes. Yeah, I think you can see the holes. And here's the pot. I have my 1 pound of green beans. I'm going to always open the lid away from you. I get going busy and I forget, and then I have all that steam coming on me. And I'm going to go ahead and place the green beans in the colander. I'm going to place those in the boiling water. sometimes it's handy to go ahead and test that out the first time, you know, measure off how far that's going to raise up. I've overfilled before and had it come out the sides, which was awful. I am going to keep an eye out because I don't start my timer. In this case, we're doing 3 minutes. I don't start my timer until I'm back to a boil. But if I don't come back to a boil within roughly a minute, that means I've got my ratio off. I've got too much produce for the amount of water I've got in the pot. So I want to be careful for that. And I'm just giving it a timer here because I want to make sure. I tried to figure out a way that I could have like 3 pots going. So I was like putting one set of green beans in, taking another one out. Yeah, I'm not that TV savvy yet, so that might take a while. Maybe the next canning demonstration I'll be up to that, but not today. All right, so we are back up to a boil. I'm not gonna make you all sit through a whole 3 minutes of us sitting here watching the watch pot boil, but I did just want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to do with these green beans after. Because at first I thought I would get my food grade, freezer grade bags out and freeze them. And as I started to label them, I thought, wow, why don't you go ahead and try drying them in the dehydrator? So I'm still not sure yet. I might go ahead and freeze some and dry some. But the reason I bring that up is because I just would encourage you to kind of think outside what you normally do. Like we always think, well, I always think of green beans, you know, canned in a jar. And lately I've been freezing some, canning some. And so another option is dehydrating. So there are a lot of different things you can do, like for instance, with tomatoes, that's another great example. You could dry some of your tomato harvest. You could can it, of course, and then of course you can freeze it as well, freeze your tomatoes. They're all gonna serve a different purpose for me and for what I cook, but still you have all those options. So let's pretend that these have been going for 3 full minutes. And also let's pretend that I'm gonna do this over the sink where it's safer. Okay. So ding, 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 my timer went off. Yay. I'm gonna take them out. And I'm gonna put them in this ice bath here. And I'm going to cool them down for roughly the same amount of time that I was blanching them. So probably 3 minutes or so. Yeah, the pot's hot. So let's pretend I've been cooling these for like 3 minutes. So I want, if I'm going to freeze these, I want to make sure I get as much water off as possible. And that's when my salad spinner is my friend, for sure. I can place these in the salad spinner. It's going to help me get the excess water off of them before I dry in the dehydrator, or even if I'm freezing. So let's pretend that my green beans are now totally cool. I'm going to get that water off of them. Put them in my basket. And I'm just going to give them some time to spin in there so we can get as much water off as possible. I'm sure you all have one of these in the back of your pantry somewhere. You can put it to good use this canning season. So those are the steps for the blanching. And I should have included the salad spinner as a good tool for food preservation. So let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Just to recap, 1 gallon of water per pound of produce. We don't want to have too much produce in because we won't come back up to a boil quickly enough. Blanching times, be very mindful of your blanching times. Underblanching is as bad as overblanching. Have plenty of ice on hand. You're going to go through a lot of ice when you're trying to cool down your produce. Let's see here. I think that is just about everything about blanching. I'm going to turn off my burner here because it's getting super hot in here. So if, Candace, if we could go to the next slide. I believe it is on, there we go. So I want to talk about boiling water canners. As I mentioned in the beginning, a large pot with a lid and a rack in the bottom can be a boiling water canner. This is probably, as I said before, what you're all used to seeing. Excuse me. Keep in mind, though, that you do need to be able to cover your jars 1 to 2 inches of water. And then you do need that air space for the water to briskly boil. And in a canner, a boiling water canner, the temperature reaches 212 degrees. 180 degrees to 212 degrees is when most bacteria, yeasts, and molds are destroyed. Notice I say most, not all. So what can you do with this canner? You can preserve your high acid foods in this canner. It does reach the temperatures needed for the high acid foods. And of course, they're high acid foods. And so they're acidic. So this one, of course, the lid, you're probably going to, if you purchase one, you're going to see this type of rack, and it has these hooks that help you hang it from the side. I'll be honest with you, I have a terrible time with that and the lowering and the raising. So as you will soon see, my canner does not have the rack in it anymore. You'll notice it looks like it's never been used because I put this in my canner. I took it out of my pressure canner because I just don't care for that. That is a total personal preference. Don't go by me. Do what works for you. If you like this rack, you go ahead and use it. It'll be perfectly fine. Let's see, what else can we say about this canner? Again, for high acid foods, it is not a pressure canner. Pressure canner is entirely different. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and look at the slide of the pressure canner. Okay. So pressure canners. Well, there's a lot to be said about pressure canners. It's what we use to preserve low acid foods. This will reach a temperature of 240 degrees. It reaches a much higher temperature, obviously, than a boiling water bath canner. And this is a high enough temperature to destroy the bacteria in Clostridium botulinum. So I just want to point out, though, this can also be used as a water bath canner if you do not lock the lid in place. So Candace, if you want to come back to me, I will show folks the different parts. So this is my pressure canner. Not all pressure canners look the same, of course. I will say that all pressure canners have a locking lid that can be frustrating at times, for sure. So what I'm going to recommend is, you can see, I think you can see the arrow and the arrow? Look for that. It will save you hours of frustration over the canning season. You line up those arrows, and then it slides right into place snugly. Well, mine slides into place snugly. Take a peek at your handles when you're starting. They should be firm. You don't want them to be loose and jiggling. And that's, well, it's for several reasons, but primarily, like, if you were to lift this and your handles were off, I just wouldn't want to see anybody get burned. And let's see. So that's how we lock and unlock. I'm going to take the lid off here. Now this is a Presto brand, so it happens to have a pressure dial gauge, and it's measured in pounds per square inch. We have a pressure regulator, and this acts as a safety device to prevent pressure in excess of 15 psi, and so it's a safety feature. So if anybody is nervous about using pressure canners, know that there are a couple of safety features that are going to exhaust the steam before it exceeds that 15 psi. And again, I just want to remind everybody, get your pressure gauges checked yearly, preferably at the same time every year if you can. So let's see here. So this is the vent pipe, and that's the primary pressure relief valve. And again, it's going to release pressure in excess of 15 psi. Now on the other side, we have our rubber gasket, and I think I heard Lisa talking about making sure that that is in good repair. Because that's going to form that tight seal. Again, this one has a jar rack. Sometimes they're called canning cooking racks. What it does is it keeps the jars off the bottom of the canner, and that allows the water to circulate around the jars. And it's pretty much the whole thing. Inspect your canner every year. The safety valves are there. You want to make sure they're not clogged. For instance, you could run a toothpick here to make sure that there's no buildup of any kind. Again, there are many different kinds. Not all have the pressure gauge. Some have a rocker, which I have an example of. I'm sure you're all familiar with that tick, 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 tick sound. So this is weighted, and there we go. It has 5, 10, and 15 pounds. And for instance, when I set it like this, I can see 15 here. But this is just a different brand, so it's a little bit different setup. So I just, I'm being mindful of the time. I think I may have gone over my allotted time, so I'm trying to catch up. Can we look at the next slide, Candace? I just want to talk, and they don't need to see me for this part. I just want to review those important temperatures one more time. So water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but altitude adjustments have to be made. So if you want to check where you are, you can go to the UMaine Food Preservation website for altitude by county. 212 Fahrenheit, remember, is your boiling water bath canner. And let's see, the 240 degrees that you see up towards the top there, that's the temperature achieved in a pressure canner, and it is needed for the low acid foods to destroy those bacterial spores. And 50 to 70 degrees is the recommended storage temperature for home canned foods. So let's just review real quickly the food acidity. So can we look at the pH scale in the next slide? Awesome. So the takeaway here is that high acid foods can be preserved in the boiling water bath canner. Low acid foods, they have to be preserved in the pressure canner. When you think of high acid foods, think of lemons, fruits, and vinegar. Low acid foods are going to be the things like carrots, green beans, squash. So I know that we have a lot of questions remaining. If we can go back to Lisa and she'll field your questions, and I will run out back and get that electric canner that I cut out of the presentation. Sorry, whoever had that question.
Super. And the person who had the question was very disappointed you weren't going to be talking about those electric canners. So I know they're going to be very happy that you're going to go out and talk about that. Another question that came in on the chat box I see is regarding blanching green beans before dehydrating, and whether or not that step is necessary, or wouldn't the heat from the dehydrator simply kill the enzymes? The answer to that situation is that the blanching actually helps start to break down the cell walls of the food that you're drying, and that's going to allow the dehydration process to occur faster, so the food isn't languishing in that dehydrator for a longer period of time. That's also going to help kill some of those surface bacteria that could be hanging around. And studies have shown that blanching before dehydrating actually is helpful for listeria, keeping that in check, for E. coli, keeping that in check, and also that botulinum, those botulinum spores that we want to keep in check because of the botulism. So those are all really great ways. So yes, it is recommended to blanch your vegetables before you dehydrate, doing the exact same guidelines that Laurie just showed you. All different vegetables have different timetables for blanching, so you do want to reference a chart that will show you what is the best recommended time for blanching. Do you want to cover, Laurie, the steam canner yourself? Or do you want me to touch on like the Instant Pot and stuff like that first before you jump in?
Do you mind? I'm unpacking my canner.
Sure. So a couple of questions have come up recently, because canning is a science, and science is always evolving, and new methods come up and new products are coming onto the market all the time. And in the past few years, the Instant Pot or electric pressure cooker craze has swept the nation. And many of these pots, whether it's an Instant Pot, which is a brand name, or another brand name of electric pressure cooker, are oftentimes marketed as being appropriate for canning. University of Georgia Cooperative Extension, they are the folks behind all of the canning research in this country. So we look to Georgia as the gurus of the know-alls of everything canning. And Georgia is the only university who's done research on the electric pressure cookers to see if they really are adequate pressure canners. And the research is a resounding no. So although the electric pressure cookers have been marketed as suitable for canning, they do not get those foods to a hot enough temperature. So Laurie mentioned that the pressure canner is going to bring foods up to a 240 degree level. And the key is not only to get to 240 degrees, which is when your processing time will start, you have to hold that 240 degrees throughout the entire processing time so that the food in your jars, inside the container, inside the canner, is all coming to the same temperature at the same time for the long period of time. With the electric pressure cookers, the temperature will get to 240 degrees, but then it drops and it fluctuates throughout the entire processing time. It does not hold at the safe processing time. So for that reason, it is not recommended to use the electric pressure cookers as a canner. That's completely different from the electric pressure canners. So and it's really hard because we sometimes talk about pressure cookers and pressure canners interchangeably, but you really do have to be careful. What Laurie is going to talk to you about is the marketed and appropriate electric pressure canner. Take it away, Laurie.
Thank you. So I changed my camera angle, so hopefully you all could see this. So this is a boiling water bath canner. It's just not on the stove, basically, is the big difference here. It has the plug-in, as you can see, and that comes around the back and plugs in. But one of the reasons, okay, so there's several reasons why I really like this. Number one, I have a small kitchen and things on the stove can get super crowded. So that means that I can do this on my counter beside my stove, and you know, if I'm really, really busy. Another thing is this has a dual purpose. You can use it for get-togethers if you were doing some drinks, like I think of wassail. It has a spigot right here that you can dispense. I suppose you could dispense coffee out of it as well, but I don't drink coffee, so I don't know that. But the other thing that I like about this is I can place this near the sink and I can use this to drain that hot water out. So if you're finding that lifting the heavy canners full of water is getting to be difficult or challenging or anything like that, then this is a great option for you. I always think of our agribility program and where we try to adapt tools, and this would be great for the canning ability because it does make it a lot easier rather than carrying heavy canners. But this is the same thing, has all the same pieces that I showed you with the other water bath canner. I've got a rack, oh, get my camera angle right, that's gonna sit in the bottom. It's gonna keep the jars up off the bottom of the canner. I have a lid, and this lid is for certain gonna give us plenty of space. I talked about how we have to have 1 to 2 inches of water over our jars, and then we have to have, you know, roughly an inch of space to make sure we have room for the water to boil. So this has all the same pieces that are required. As I said before, the only difference is you don't put this on the stove. You don't have to because you can plug it in. And also we have some temperature controls on the front here. We have low, medium, high, and then we have our canning area. And so I think it's a great rig, but that's my personal opinion. It just, I guess I have my reasons for really liking it. Oh, and I like it when I do workshops different places, because if I go someplace where they don't have a stove, we're still able to do our canning. So back to you, Lisa.
Sure. So thanks, Laurie. That's awesome. That's awesome. I don't have one of those gizmos yet, but I really need to get myself one. And so the question comes up again about, so the electric pressure canners that are out on the market, if they are put out by a reputable company, and Miro, Presto, Looking for the All-American. Those are all pretty standard names in the canning world. If you're buying a electric pressure canner by one of those big companies, you can be pretty much assured that you're getting a good product. Again, it's being marketed as a pressure canner. It is being sold as a pressure canner, and that's critical. We get into trouble when it's the pressure cookers that are being touted as also good for canners. That's not their first job. Their first job is to be a pressure cooker, and they're also enticing people to purchase one because it can also can, but that is not the truth. They are not suitable for canning at this time. I believe there are no more questions that I can see that have come up.
And I don't see any on Facebook Live. So unless there's anything else that you have to add or Laurie has, then I guess we'll just wrap it up.
Yeah, actually, I just thought of something. Today's topic was super broad. I was trying to cram so much into one overview. But if you have a particular topic in canning or food preservation that you would like to see us do, if you just let us know, we can talk about it. And maybe next time we can be a little more topic specific.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Lisa. That was an excellent presentation. And thank everybody for coming. You got a lot of thanks here in Zoom. People are thanking you for the presentation and everything. We will send out a follow-up survey with some links in it for everybody. And other than that, I guess you just say goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy.